So I'm Rachel Arts from the Learning and Development Book Club, and this is my 10-minute review of Mindset, Changing the Way You Think to Fulfill Your Potential. So this was our read this last month, and I was so happy to read this book because I've been using the principles of growth mindset and fixed mindset in my programs for quite some time. So let's get straight into the book. So obviously, as you'd expect, the first couple of chapters give you a really deep insight into what is meant by fixed and growth mindsets. So Dr. Carol Dweck tells the story of how she, as a young researcher, became obsessed with how people cope with failures. And she started studying children. And her first studies involved giving different groups of children really hard puzzles to do. And the children would just react so differently. So some would be like, really, no, that's really hard, I can't do it. And they get frustrated and get angry and get upset and refuse to engage anymore. And others would be like, oh, wow, this is hard, but I love a challenge. And it would make them more engaged and more determined to try and to think and to try and puzzle it out. So that was the beginning of her work. Just being fascinated with how some people didn't see failing, they just saw learning. And she gives this lovely story around the creation of the IQ test. So the IQ test was designed by a Frenchman, Binet, and apparently he originally created it to identify children that were not profiting from the Paris public schools. And so he used it to kind of gauge underlying intelligence. And he's quoted as saying, it's not always the people who start out the smartest that end up the smartest. So he recognized there was something to do with, you know, it's not just innate ability, it's what you do with it. So the first chapter is all about that, exploring the point that scientists are learning that people have far more capacity for lifelong learning and brain development than they ever thought. And then also explaining that the fixed mindset, which is believing your abilities are set and limited and carved in stone, that fixed mindset, what that does to you is it creates an urgency to prove yourself over and over again. And that's the challenge with it. So the growth mindset, to define it, is about the love of challenge, a belief in effort, resilience in the face of setbacks, leading to greater or more creative success. Okay, so fairly early on in the book, after she's done a thorough explanation of the different types of mindsets and the studies that she's done and other people have done, she moves on to the point that you can change your mindset, and that mindsets are just beliefs. They're powerful beliefs, but they're just something in your mind and you can change your mind. She also made the point fairly early on, which I was pleased about because I'd actually worked this one out myself, that it's not as simple as labeling everyone as you've got a fixed mindset or you've got a growth mindset, that actually we both have both. We have them all. We might apply our fixed mindset to some things and our growth mindset to other things, but we're all going to have a mix. And there was a couple of points in the book that were just small little points, but they really, really spoke to me. And one of them was that, you know, obviously, to have a growth mindset, then effort is crucial, but she does recognize that effort is not the only thing. She actually says effort isn't quite everything. Not all effort is created equal. So some people do have more advantages in that regard. Another little quote I wrote down, I kept loads of quotes as I went through the book because it was full of so many little one-liners. Another one is growth mindset doesn't need confidence. Even when you think you're not good at something, you can still plunge into it wholeheartedly and stick to it. She gives the example of Thomas Edison, who's usually credited with discovering the light bulb. And she tells the story, well, she says, you know, how would you imagine him discovering the light bulb? And I think most of us would picture an old grey man in a white coat in a lab, and suddenly the light comes on. And actually, he had a whole team of researchers. He was very entrepreneurial. He was very driven. He knew there'd be commercial opportunities. Yes, he liked engineering and making things as well, but it was his, you know, it was his kind of trying many things and building a team and just keeping going, and he knew he'd get there one day. So it's that kind of relentless pursuit that led to the invention of the light bulb, not just the fact that he just happened to be a genius, and which he probably was as well. So because Dr. Dweck's background was working with children, there's a lot of the book is spent talking about education and education systems and teaching and so on. So if you're interested in that aspect, if you're interested in teaching, if you're interested in children, then there's loads in the book that would be for you. And one of the things she talks about is just the danger of labeling children, like telling children that they're smart. Actually, that can make them feel dumber, because you know, if you tell a child they're smart, then the next time they can't solve a problem, they'll think they're not smart. So that's the problem with labels like gifted and talented. There's also a whole chapter of the book dedicated to the sports arena, and there's loads of sports stories all the way through. I have to say, I didn't particularly love these. There's only so many baseball or basketball stories I can read. But the underlying point is that in the fixed mindset, effort is not a cause for pride. It is something that casts doubt on your talent. So she talks about the idea that sometimes we like to think that our sports heroes are just natural superheroes, but actually maybe they've just put in, you know, a lot more effort than everyone else. And there's another little quote I've written out, is worrying about being a nobody is not the mindset that motivates and sustains champions. So yeah, that fear of failure isn't going to motivate you to win necessarily. Then there's a whole chapter dedicated to business, and I really love this chapter. I pretty much could have just written the whole chapter out as it was, but just to pick out the key bits. So she gives some really good examples of different corporate leaders, those that were great leaders, and she talks about a study by Warren Bennis, where he studied the world's greatest corporate leaders. The great leaders said they didn't set out to be leaders. They had no interest in proving themselves. They just did what they loved with tremendous drive and enthusiasm, and it led where it led. Whereas there's other leaders that she does give examples of that thought they were inherently superior. So then they opt out of learning, and it's that learning that might have helped them succeed, or they opt out of listening to the people, or sometimes to enhance their own feelings of power and competence and value, they put other people down around them. And she tells a story. Yeah, she gives examples of leaders where basically they set the company up to fail because they want everything to go really well in the short term while they're there, and then once they leave, it all falls apart because it wasn't sustainable. So really quite serious stuff there in businesses. Yeah, actually the business chapter was really good because there was a whole piece about teams and group work as well. So I really liked that. And I'll just read a little quote that I picked out. It says, the members of the growth mindset groups were much more likely to state their honest opinions and openly express their disagreements as they communicated about their management decisions. Everyone was part of the learning process. For the fixed mindset groups, with a concern about who was smart or dumb, or their anxiety about disapproval for their ideas, that open, productive discussion did not happen. Instead, it was more like groupthink. So very powerful lessons there for group work or teamwork with mindset, I think. And then obviously the same point applies, that you can teach mindset to individuals, but you can teach growth mindset to managers as well. For me, reading a book like this is you just want practical stuff. You want stuff that you can take away and use. And that's what I was looking for. So a few times there were little questions that you can, test on yourself. But, I was really poring over this chapter on business to see if there was things I could just use. And she talks about workshops that she's done with managers to help them understand. And she gives, very general overview of what she did. Quite generally, not too much detail, but there's enough there that's, I can take that and think, okay, that I can work with that and build that. So that was nice. Each chapter has a really good summary, so that was nice. Then after the business chapter, the next chapter was a bit of a surprise for me that I wasn't I didn't expect to see this one in the book, but it was about relationships. And obviously mindset can play a really powerful role in relationships. And I love this chapter. It actually made me smile all the way through, probably because of my own personal experiences with my own mindset, which is all good and positive. For me, it was like that chapter was a big tick. But when in the book club conversation that we had reviewing the book, one person shared, oh yeah, I need some help in that area. So actually I would say, you know, if relationships, things aren't going quite right there, then you maybe look at your mindset and, you know, have a look at the book and read that chapter, because, you know, you have to have the right mindset to be able to deal with all the ups and downs of dating and even when you're in a relationship. So yeah, quite a surprising chapter. I wasn't expecting that, but it did make me smile, and there were things in there that I recognized. Okay, so the next bit that I really liked in the book, and I'll probably finish with this, was she talks about, well, actually, one other thing I'll say first before I say that. She talks about false growth mindset. So this is where people have taken the concept and they've just kind of twisted it, or they haven't fully understood it, and they oversimplify it. So she talks about a false growth mindset, and that's partly the reason that she wrote this second book, was to correct some of the misinformation or you know, the false theories that were coming from her work. So that's worth looking at, just to make sure you're not jumping on the wrong bandwagon. But anyway, the bit that I really like that I'm going to close with was called the journey to a growth mindset. So if you've got a fixed mindset, she talks about how you can challenge that, and she did this in a workshop setting with students. So it's all about recognizing you have a fixed growth mindset somewhere and really analyzing it. So she talks about embracing it. So you start that by thinking about, what are your fixed mindset triggers? When does your fixed mindset persona come home to roost? So what are the triggers? What situations? What's the topic area that causes it to bubble up? And then she talks about giving your fixed mindset persona a name. So that, to me, kind of separates it from you and it makes it other, and you're giving it a name. And then she said, then you can educate it and you can take it on the journey with you and bring it along and turn it around. And I thought that was really nice. And in the book, she gives some examples of letters, because she got her students to write a letter to their fixed mindset. So that was really, really interesting, how people just jumped, they just really got it and could really identify it. So that was a good place for me to end on, I think. There was so much in the book. I made like 6 pages of notes, loads of quotes I pulled out. It's a book I will be dipping in and out of and drawing on, you know, what I got from it again and again, and building some of the work that I do on the modern learner around that. So if you're interested in any of those topics about personal development and learning and growth, then definitely worth having a read. Okay, thank you.